She felt him before she heard him. 3 in the morning, the penthouse kitchen bathed in pale silver light bleeding in from the city below, and Vivian Harlow was standing at the marble island in an oversized sleep shirt, both hands wrapped around a mug of chamomile tea she hadn't touched yet because she couldn't stop shaking. Not from cold, not from fear, from the weight of what was happening to her life, quietly and without her permission, like water finding cracks in a foundation she had been so sure was solid. She heard his bare feet on the hardwood before she felt his warmth, and then Marcus Elijah Cole, CEO of Cole Meridian Group, the man whose name moved markets, was standing directly behind her. Not touching her, just there. 6 feet 3 inches of controlled power. The kind of man who never did anything without intention. And yet at 3 in the morning, he was standing close enough that she could feel heat radiating off his chest like a second source of light in the dark room. She should have stepped away. The contract said to step away. The contract said a great many things. It had 47 clauses. Vivian knew every one of them by memory because she had read it 11 times the night Marcus slid it across his desk to her, leather-bound, professionally typed, and more intimate in its requirements than anything she had ever signed in her life. Clause 12. No romantic entanglement. Clause 19. Physical boundaries to be maintained at all professional and residential distances. Clause 31. The arrangement terminates upon the death or recovery of Elijah Nathaniel Cole Sr., upon which all parties return to prior professional capacities with full discretion intact. 47 clauses, and none of them had prepared her for this. For 3 in the morning. For the weight of his presence at her back. For the way his hands, those careful, deliberate hands she had watched sign billion-dollar deals and dismiss rooms full of executives with a single raised finger, came to rest so gently on her waist that for one suspended second, she genuinely was not sure he had touched her at all. But then his fingers pressed in. Slightly. Just enough. And Vivian Harlow, who had a first-class honors degree, who had survived 4 years as personal assistant to the most demanding man in Manhattan, who had negotiated her way into and out of impossible situations without flinching, completely forgot how to breathe. His voice came low, roughened by sleep and something else she refused to name. "You're up." Not a question. An observation delivered against the back of her hair, close enough that she felt the warmth of the words themselves before she processed them. "Couldn't sleep," she said. Her voice came out steadier than she deserved credit for. The tea in her mug rippled, betraying her hands. His thumbs moved. The smallest motion. A slow, absent press against the curve of her waist through the thin fabric of her sleep shirt. And she felt it everywhere. Felt it in places that had no business responding to a man who had put 47 clauses between them because feelings were not part of the arrangement. And then, as if he had only just realized what his hands were doing, as if some sleeping part of him had acted without consulting the controlled, careful, clause-aware part, he went still. Not pulling away, just still. Both of them suspended in the dark kitchen, the city glittering 40 floors below, his warmth at her back, his hands on her waist, and the particular silence of 2 people who have made a rule they are both currently breaking without technically having moved. Something else was present between them. Not just warmth, something slower and more specific. A heat that moved differently than body temperature, that gathered at the points of contact and spread outward with the patient insistence of something that had been waiting a long time for permission. She thought about turning around. She did not. And Marcus Cole, who had never hesitated in his professional life, did not step back. That was the beginning of the end of 47 clauses, though neither of them knew it yet. 6 months earlier, Vivian Harlow had been perfectly happy. That was what she told herself, standing in the elevator that opened directly into the 54th floor executive suite of Cole Meridian Tower on a Tuesday morning in February, her tablet in one hand and a black coffee in the other. 31 years old. Best job in the building. Excellent shoes. A clean apartment and absolutely zero complications in her personal life, which she had come to regard less as loneliness and more as a kind of professional virtue. Marcus Cole was waiting for her, as he always was, already behind his desk at 7:45, jacket on, the Manhattan skyline framed behind him like the city had arranged itself as his personal backdrop. He was, objectively, an almost unreasonably beautiful man. Broad-shouldered, dark-skinned, sharp-jawed, with steady dark eyes that made you feel like the most important thing in the room while making it clear he had already decided how the conversation would end. Vivian had been immune to him for 4 years. She told herself that too. She moved through the morning briefing efficiently and was about to leave when he spoke, and something in the quality of his voice, a slight flatness under the usual control, made her turn back. "Close the door," he said. She closed the door. He set down the document. He looked at her in the way that made lesser people step back. Vivian held her ground. 4 years of practice. "My father is dying." The words landed quietly, the way the worst words always do, without drama, just settling into the air like something irrevocable. "Pancreatic, stage 4. 6 months, maybe less. He's 73, and he has spent the last 8 years asking me one thing." A pause. "He wants to see me walk down the aisle before he goes." Vivian said nothing. She was very good at saying nothing when it mattered. "I am not in a position to enter a real marriage," he continued. "I don't have time. I refuse to bring a woman in under false pretenses, which leaves a private arrangement, a contract, something clean, bounded, with a start date and an end date, and no ambiguity about what it is." "You're asking me to marry you," Vivian said. "I'm asking if you'd consider it. The terms would be yours to negotiate. The compensation would be significant. You would continue your professional role. Personally, you would appear as my wife to my family, specifically to my father, as many times as required before." He stopped. Something passed across his face, brief and gone. "Before he doesn't need to see it anymore." "How much time do I have to think about it?" she asked. Something that wasn't quite a smile. "I had the contract drawn up this morning. Take a week." She took the folder. She turned. She walked out. In the elevator, descending alone, she pressed her back against the cold metal wall and breathed through the strange and complicated knowledge that she was going to say yes, and that her reasons were not entirely as professional as she was about to tell herself they were. She read the contract 11 times. She said yes. The wedding was on a Saturday in late February, 8 days after he asked. Not a wedding, technically. A ceremony. Private. A judge Marcus had known for 20 years, a man named Theodore Park who asked no questions and kept meticulous records, standing in the library of Marcus's Upper East Side townhouse, which was the size of a small country estate and smelled of old leather and cedar and the ghost of a fire. Vivian had worn white. She hadn't planned to. She had gone to her closet that morning fully intending to choose something practical, something that said clearly this is a transaction between professionals, and had stood there for 10 minutes before quietly taking out the cream silk wrap dress she had bought for a friend's engagement party and never worn. She told herself it was the most appropriate thing she owned for the occasion. She did not examine this claim too closely. Marcus was in a dark suit, no tie, the top button of his shirt open, which was unusual for him, and which Vivian noticed and then firmly declined to think about. Judge Park stood between them. No guests, no flowers, no music. Outside the tall library windows, February sleet tapped quietly against the glass, and the room was very still. "Do you, Marcus Elijah Cole, take this woman as your lawfully wedded wife?" Marcus looked at her. Really looked at her. Not the way he looked at presentations or contracts, but in a way that had no strategy in it at all, simply direct and present. And Vivian felt something shift in the middle of her chest, like a door on old hinges, slow and inexorable. "I do," he said. Quiet, level. But his eyes didn't move from hers. "Do you, Vivian Ann Harlow, take this man as your lawfully wedded husband?" She had 11 clauses in her head. She had compensation figures and exit terms and clear professional reasoning for every decision she had made in the last 8 days. "I do," she said. Judge Park said the words. Marcus reached for her left hand, and what she had not expected was for his thumb to trace once across her knuckles before he placed the ring. A gesture so small and so completely outside the terms of their agreement that she almost asked him about it. She did not ask. She let the gold band settle onto her finger and looked at it for one unguarded second before looking back at him. "You may kiss the bride," said Judge Park. "It's required for the paperwork." Marcus looked at her. The question was in his eyes without being asked. She tilted her chin up slightly. "Professional. This is the arrangement." He leaned down and his mouth touched hers. And it was brief, barely a moment, the most technically minimal kiss in the history of matrimony. And yet she felt it from the crown of her head to the soles of her feet, and stood very still for 2 full seconds after he pulled back, relearning basic functions. "Congratulations," said Judge Park, already reaching for his coat. Marcus turned to thank the judge, and Vivian stood alone by the window for a moment, the sleet on the glass, the faint weight of gold on her left hand, and understood with absolute clarity that she was in an enormous amount of trouble. They moved into the penthouse the following week. Marcus's penthouse. 40 floors above Midtown. 3,000 square feet of deliberate minimalism and the best view of Manhattan that money could buy. He had shown her the floor plan, indicated which of the 3 guest rooms would be hers, specified that the east wing was his, that the shared spaces were shared with no obligation on either side. Clean. Bounded. Professional. She had stood in her guest room that first Sunday evening and thought, "This is completely manageable. I have managed proximity with this man for 4 years. 6 months is nothing." She had managed it for approximately 9 days before the proximity started doing something unexpected to her central nervous system. It was the small things. That was what she hadn't accounted for. She had prepared for the large things, the family dinners, the public appearances, the performances the arrangement required. What she hadn't prepared for was the gray t-shirt he wore before his morning run. The way he always checked that she'd eaten before any conversation after 6 p.m. The handwritten notes he left sometimes on the kitchen counter, not texts, not emails, actual ink on paper about schedule changes or groceries. In handwriting she found herself looking at longer than the content required. Or the conversations. Marcus Cole, in the professional world, spoke in a precise and economical way that wasted nothing. Controlled. Formidable. Impersonal in the way of men who understand that warmth in professional settings can be used against you. In the penthouse, in the evenings, when they somehow always ended up in the same room despite 3,000 square feet, he talked differently, with a quality of attention when she spoke that made her feel like the most specific and particular version of herself, rather than a general person being politely heard. He asked about her sister in Portland, about the book she'd left face down on the kitchen counter. And once, in a tone so casual it took her a moment to register, what she had wanted to do with her life before she'd fallen into executive assistance and discovered she was excellent at it. She had stared at him. "You've never asked me that," she said. "I'm asking now. We've worked together for 4 years. "I know," he said. And there was something in it, honest and quiet, a recognition of the professional blindness that keeps people in the same space for years without ever actually seeing each other. She told him about the journalism degree she'd half finished before her mother's illness redirected everything, about the file on her laptop, half a manuscript, too personal to publish and too alive to delete, about writing in the margins of her notebooks, not notes, but sentences, phrases, language as a reflex. Marcus listened without interrupting. When she stopped, he was quiet. "You should finish it," he said. "It's not that simple. Most important things aren't. That doesn't mean they're not worth finishing." She had gone to bed that night with his words in her head and a feeling in her chest that she had no clause number 4. The first family dinner was 3 weeks in. Elijah Cole Sr. lived in a brownstone in Harlem he had owned for 40 years and refused to leave. He was a tall man, thinner now than photographs showed him, with the same jaw as his son and eyes that were dark and still, and seeing in a way that made Vivienne understand immediately that this was not a man who could be managed or performed at. Marcus held her hand in the car. They had agreed on this, the details of natural contact, the language they'd use, the story they'd built together. His hand on hers felt nothing like the agreement. It felt like warmth and weight and fingers that fit against hers in a way that shouldn't have been notable, and was. She did not comment on this. Dorothy Cole met them at the door and pulled Vivienne into a hug that was immediate and warm and completely without the cautious assessment she'd expected. "Finally," Dorothy said into Vivienne's hair. "He actually brought someone." "Mama," Marcus said, with the resigned patience of a man who has accepted that certain battles cannot be won. Elijah Sr. was in the front room, in a chair by the window, a blanket across his knees. He looked up when they came in, and the relief in his face when he saw Marcus hit Vivienne somewhere she hadn't protected. She felt Marcus's hand tighten on hers, brief and involuntary. She tightened back without thinking. The two men held each other with the particular intensity of fathers and sons who are not practiced at tenderness and yet cannot help it. Vivienne stepped back to give them the moment, and Dorothy touched her arm gently, and Vivienne looked at the ceiling briefly and blinked. When Marcus straightened and turned back to her, his face was quieter than usual, softer in a way he wouldn't have allowed anywhere else. "Dad," he said, "this is Vivienne." Elijah Cole looked at her. The still, seeing eyes. Not unkind, just honest, in the way of old people who have no more time to pretend. "Vivienne," he said, "how long have you known my son?" 4 years, she said. "The true number, at least. And you married him anyway." There was a dry warmth in it. Vivienne felt something loosen in her chest. "I had my reasons," she said. Elijah Cole laughed, a real laugh, rougher now than it had once been, and his eyes moved between her and his son with an expression Vivienne recognized and immediately tried not to think too hard about. It was the expression of a man who believed he was seeing something real. She had not prepared herself for how that would feel. At some point during dinner, Dorothy pressed Vivienne into the kitchen under the pretense of helping with dessert and used the occasion to tell her, with the directness of a woman who had earned the right, that she was glad Marcus had finally stopped using work as a substitute for living. Vivienne had stood at the kitchen counter holding a serving dish and not known what to do with the warmth of being welcomed like this, genuinely and without reservation, into something she had arrived at sideways. At the end of the night, Elijah took her hand in both of his. His grip was dry and thin, and still strong. "Thank you for coming into his life," he said. She could not speak for a full second. "Thank you for having me," she said finally. The words felt true in a way she hadn't intended them to. In the car on the way home, Marcus still held her hand. Not for the family, not for the performance. The windows were dark, the driver behind the privacy screen, no one watching, and his hand was in hers, and she did not take it away. And the city went past the window like a river of light. The weeks that followed had a quality she had not anticipated. They began to feel, against all 47 clauses and her considerable resistance, like a life. Not a performance. A life. With its rhythms and its small accumulated moments. She knew his silences now, all of them. She knew that when he came home late and went to the kitchen instead of his study, the day had gone badly in a way he hadn't finished processing. She knew the tightness around his eyes on Tuesdays. She knew he slept with the window cracked even in February. And he saw her. That was what she kept running into when she tried to maintain appropriate distances. Not the assistant, Vivian specifically. With her half-finished manuscript and the way she still flinched when the phone rang at unusual hours. He had asked about the flinching. Gently. Just asking. She told him more than she meant to. He listened without fixing anything or redirecting. When she finished, he said simply, "She sounds like someone you were lucky to have." She was, Vivian said. And then, very quietly, "So are you." Meaning she was the same kind of person. Worth having. She had not known what to do with the simple, clean weight of it. So she said goodnight and went to her room and sat in the dark for a while, feeling the gold band on her hand. The complications were accumulating. Quietly, without drama, the way real things always do. Then came the night of the charity gala, a Cole Meridian Foundation event, formal, annual, the kind of guest list that required security clearance and a separate team just to manage the press. Vivian had helped organize it for 3 years as his assistant. This year she attended as his wife, which was, she had not adequately prepared herself to discover, a categorically different experience. He had sent her flowers that afternoon, not through the office, delivered to the penthouse, to her specifically. White peonies, and something small and fragrant she didn't know the name of, with a card in his handwriting that said only, "Tonight, thank you, M." She stood in the kitchen, holding the card longer than was proportionate to its content. Her dress was midnight blue, floor length, fitted in the way that requires a particular kind of confidence to wear. She was ready 5 minutes before the scheduled time, standing in the entrance hall when Marcus came out of his wing, already fully dressed, and he stopped when he saw her. Not a pause, a stop, complete and unambiguous. She watched him look at her, and whatever she had expected, polite professional acknowledgement, "This will read well for the evening assessment," was not what she got. What she got was a moment of completely unguarded looking, the kind that bypasses professional composure entirely, and then he crossed the entrance hall and held out his arm. "You look," he said, and then seemed to reconsider the word he'd been reaching for. "Exceptional." "You clean up adequately," she said. He laughed, low and real, and she felt it like a hand at the small of her back. The gala was beautiful and full of important people who were all, in their separate ways, trying to determine the nature of Marcus Cole's marriage. Vivian fielded questions with a precision she'd spent 4 years developing and stood beside Marcus in the way they had discussed, and it should have felt like practice. And it did not feel like practice. What it felt like was his hand at the small of her back, steady through every conversation, not performative. Just there. His voice, when he introduced her, quieter and more direct than his professional register. Near the end of the evening, she stepped onto the balcony, needing air. The night was cold and clear. She stood at the stone railing and looked at nothing. She heard the door behind her. She already knew who it was. Marcus stood beside her. He looked at the city, and for a moment neither of them spoke. "This evening has not been what I expected," he said. She waited. "I expected it to be work," he said. It was not work. She turned to look at him, the slight tension in his jaw that she had learned to read as the thing before the thing he was actually going to say. "Marcus," she said into the cold air between them. He turned and looked at her with the seeing eyes, without the professional composure reinstated, and the balcony was cold and close, and the city went on below unconcerned with 47 clauses or the particular difficulty of standing in the dark with a man you are not supposed to feel things for, while your body tells you something else entirely. "We should go back in," Vivian said. "We should," he agreed. Neither of them moved. Then Marcus reached up and tucked a strand of her hair back from her face, and the touch was so incidentally tender that she closed her eyes for one full second. When she opened them, he was closer than he'd been, and the gold band on her hand caught the light, and he looked at her for one more moment with something deliberate and unheld in his expression, before he opened the door and touched the small of her back as she walked through. She walked through with her spine straight and her breathing under control, and the absolute private knowledge that every clause in that contract was quietly, systematically coming undone. 3 weeks after the gala, Elijah Cole Sr. was hospitalized. The progression had accelerated without warning. Marcus got the call Thursday at 6 and was out the door 17 minutes later, still pulling on his coat, and Vivian stood in the early gray light listening to the elevator descending and feeling something cold settle into the apartment in his absence. She went to the hospital at noon. She hadn't been asked. She simply understood, with the knowledge that comes from knowing someone rather than managing them, that she should be there. She found Marcus in the corridor, standing against the wall in the posture of a person keeping himself upright through sheer decision. He looked up when he heard her footsteps, and something in his face moved, an opening, involuntary, before it closed again. "You didn't have to come," he said. "I know," she said. She stood beside him, said nothing, and stayed. Dorothy came out and Vivienne held her hands and said the right things, because she had sat in corridors like this before, and the right things came from a place that didn't require calculation. At some point, Marcus sat down in one of the gray corridor chairs, face in his hands, and Vivienne sat beside him, and when she finally moved, it was only to set her hand over his. He turned his hand under hers so their fingers laced, and he held on, and she held back, and neither of them mentioned Clause 12 or any of the other 38. He held her hand for 40 minutes. She counted. When Dorothy came back with Elijah stable and resting, Marcus released a breath Vivian felt in her own chest. He looked at her. Something naked in his eyes he didn't bother to hide, just this once. "Thank you," he said. Not for anything specific, just thank you, with everything it contained. On the way home, in the dark car, he held her hand again. Not because anyone was watching, no performance to maintain, and his hand was in hers, and she let it be there because she could not think of a single good reason to take it away. She had 47 of them. Not one felt sufficient anymore. And so to 3 in the morning, the marble kitchen, the chamomile tea cooling in the mug, his hands on her waist. They stayed like that for a long time, both of them suspended in the dark kitchen, his warmth at her back, his presence filling the space with something she had been carefully refusing to name for weeks. His thumbs pressed in once more, slow and deliberate this time, not absent, not accidental. And she felt it the way she felt everything he did now, all the way down, gathering somewhere low and insistent that had no patience left for professional distance. The city glittered 40 floors below. The clock on the microwave read 3:14 when she finally moved. Not away. She turned. It was the smallest turn, just pivoting on the balls of her feet, and then she was facing him, and he was right there, closer than the dark had made him feel, and she was looking up at him, and he was looking down at her, and his hands had slid from her waist as she turned, but they were still near, hovering at the edge of contact in a way that was more charged than the touch itself had been. The heat between them was not imaginary. It was physical, particular. The kind of warmth that has a specific direction and will not be reasoned with. "Marcus," she said. The third time she had said his name in a context Clause 12 should have prevented. "I know," he said, not dismissively, with the tone of a man confirming something he has been aware of for longer than he allowed himself to acknowledge. "The contract, I know," he said again. She looked at him. The controlled face that was not controlled anymore opened in a way the professional version of him never permitted. He looked tired in the way a person gets when they have been trying very hard to be sensible about something that is not cooperating. "What are we doing?" she said. The city hummed far below. The clock said 3:15. "I don't know," he said. The most honest thing she had ever heard from him. Marcus Cole always knew. Always had the strategy and the exit. And standing here in the dark kitchen, he was telling her he did not know. And the not knowing was somehow the most complete thing he had offered her yet. Her hand came up. She set her palm flat against his chest, just over his heartbeat. Steady and real, and faster than rest would explain. He closed his eyes, just for a second. The way a person does when they have been braced for a long time, and something arrives that makes them put the bracing down. When he opened them, he looked at her with everything. No clause between them, no managed expression, just Marcus. And whatever he had been protecting behind 47 provisions was right there in his face, unguarded and directed entirely at her. He lifted one hand and set it against her jaw, and she turned her face slightly into it the way something with instincts rather than contracts would. And the kitchen was very quiet. "Vivian," he said, and she said, very softly, "I know." He leaned down, and this time the kiss was nothing like the one in the library on their wedding day. Nothing minimal, nothing performed for paperwork. This was the kiss of someone who had been waiting, had been paying attention for longer than was professional, had held her hand in corridors and at galas and in cars with no one watching, and had arrived here at 3 in the morning by the slow and certain gravity of a thing that 47 clauses had not been sufficient to prevent. She kissed him back, with the full and committed decision of a woman who had read the contract 11 times, who knew every exit, and who was choosing, deliberately and without ambiguity, to stay. His hands slid from her jaw to her shoulders, and she moved closer. And he made a sound low in his chest that she felt more than heard, and the thin fabric of her sleep shirt was not sufficient insulation from the warmth of him, from the solid reality of his hands, and the way he kissed her like he meant it, like he had been meaning it for a long time. She had her hands in the fabric of his shirt, and the kitchen counter was cool marble against the heat of everything else, and the professional distances they had so carefully negotiated had collapsed entirely, and she found she could not locate a single regret. She pulled back slightly, enough to look at him. He looked back. Breathing changed, eyes darker. Everything about him undisguised, looking at her like she was the thing he had been trying not to want with considerable effort for considerably longer than 6 months. "We should probably talk about this," she said. "Probably," he agreed. He made no move to step back. "Tomorrow," she said. "Tomorrow," he said. And he kissed her again, briefly, with a precision that said clearly that tomorrow he would say everything. And tonight he was only saying this, and this was sufficient for now. She lay awake for a long time after, the gold band on her hand, the city quiet outside, and the particular sensation of a life rearranging itself around something real. 47 clauses. Not one of them had stood a chance. The tomorrow he had promised her arrived gray and quiet, Manhattan wrapped in low cloud, the kind of morning that softens the city's edges and makes the whole of it feel closer, more contained, more like a place where things can be said. Vivian woke before 6. She lay in bed for 10 minutes in the particular stillness of a person who has made a decision in the night and is simply waiting for the day to catch up. The gold band on her hand caught the thin morning light. She looked at it for a while, and then she got up, and she went to the kitchen, and she made coffee, and she waited. He appeared at 6:40, dressed for his run but not yet gone, pausing in the kitchen doorway in the gray t-shirt and the look of a man who has also been awake for some time already. He looked at her across the kitchen. She looked back at him. The coffee maker finished its cycle, and in the silence after it, the apartment was very still. "You stayed," he said. "You asked me to," she said. "Technically." "I asked you to stay in the arrangement," he said. "Last night was not the arrangement." She set down her coffee cup. "No," she said. "It wasn't." He came into the kitchen, not toward her, just into the room, and stood at the counter, and for a moment the only sound was the city beginning its morning far below. Then he said, with the directness she had known for 4 years and was still apparently not fully immune to, "I need to tell you something." "All right," she said. "The arrangement was supposed to be clean," he said. "I designed it to be clean. I've designed every part of my life to be clean because clean things are manageable, and manageable things don't." He stopped. His jaw moved slightly. "I haven't done this well," he said, which was not the way Marcus Cole spoke about anything, ever, and the admission of it was so complete that she felt it land in the center of her chest. "I told myself it was from my father. That was true. But it wasn't the only reason I asked you." The morning light sat between them. She waited. "I asked you," he said, "because in 4 years there has not been a single day where I walked into my office and didn't want you in it. Not professionally." He looked at her directly. "I asked you because the simplest solution to the fact that I couldn't stop thinking about you was to make a reason to have you near me that didn't require me to say that." Vivian stood very still. "That was," he said, "not my most honest moment." She looked at him for a long time. 4 years of learning to read him, and she had read him well enough to know he had not said that kind of thing before. Not to anyone. The controlled, careful architecture of him had never had a room for it, and he had opened a door in the wall and was standing in it, waiting to see what she did. "Marcus," she said. "You don't have to. I'm going to finish," she said. And then, because she had been reading the contract 11 times and cataloging all the exits and choosing to stay anyway for weeks now, she said, "I didn't say yes because of the compensation. I didn't say yes because the terms were reasonable or because I'm excellent at managing difficult situations. I said yes because you asked me. And when you asked me, I understood in a way I wasn't prepared for that the idea of saying no was worse than anything the arrangement might cost me." He looked at her. "I've been managing that information badly for 6 months," she said. "I thought you should know." The morning was still. Outside, Manhattan was waking up. 40 floors below, all its noise and motion and relentless industry. And in the kitchen of a penthouse, 2 people stood across a counter from each other, and let the thing that had been building since before there was a contract, before there were 47 clauses, before a private wedding in a library on a February afternoon, simply be what it was. He crossed the kitchen, not slowly, with the directness of a man who has stopped negotiating with himself. He stopped when there was barely any distance left between them, and he lifted both hands and held her face, and he looked at her with everything present and nothing withheld, and she looked back at him with the same entirety, and neither of them spoke, because there was nothing left to say that this didn't already contain. He kissed her. Not like last night, which had been the breaking of a wall, urgent and overdue and full of all the compressed weight of 6 months of careful distance. This was different. This was deliberate. This was the kiss of someone who is no longer in a hurry, because the destination has been confirmed, and there is time now, real time, to do this right. His thumbs traced her jaw while he kissed her, and she had her hands against his chest and felt his heart beneath her palms, steady and strong and real. And the morning light came in through the tall windows, and the city carried on below them, and she thought, with a clarity that surprised her, "This is what I was trying so hard not to want." She had done a poor job of it. She was very glad she had done a poor job of it. When he pulled back, he didn't go far. His forehead against hers, both of them breathing slightly differently than usual, and his hands still at her jaw. And the kitchen between them was narrow and warm, and the whole penthouse felt different from how it had felt yesterday, like a space that had been holding its breath and had now let it out. "The contract," she said against his jaw. "I'll have it nullified today," he said. "The arrangement ends," she said. "The arrangement ends," he agreed. And then, with the particular and quiet certainty of a man who has decided something completely, "What we are now is not an arrangement." She pulled back enough to look at him. "What are we now?" He looked at her steadily. "I'd like to ask you something," he said. "Without a contract this time. Without terms or clauses or compensation figures. Without any of the architecture I built to avoid saying the simple version." She waited. "Stay," he said. "Not in the arrangement. Just stay." The word landed simply, the way true things do. "Yes," she said. The same word she had said in that library in February, with a judge watching and sleet on the windows and a gold band being placed on her hand, but entirely different in every way that mattered. Not a professional decision, not a managed risk. Just yes, offered freely, to a man who was finally asking for the real thing. He kissed her again, briefly and with precision, and then he held her, and she let herself be held, and the morning light expanded across the kitchen floor, and Manhattan went on below them in all its magnificent indifference. And Vivian Harlow, who had been perfectly happy before all of this and was something else entirely now, stood in the arms of Marcus Elijah Cole and understood that she had not, in fact, been prepared for any of it. She was very glad. The days that followed the morning were different, not because anything in the shape of their lives changed dramatically, not at first. They still had the penthouse. They still had the arrangement with his family that required maintaining. Marcus still led Cole Meridian, and Vivian still ran his professional world with the quiet, comprehensive efficiency she had spent 4 years perfecting. But the space between them had changed entirely. Like a room that has had a window opened in it, and what moved through it now was something warm and specific and without professional category. He kissed her in the morning before his run. That was new. Not a brief and transactional thing, but the kiss of a man who was making a point about his intentions for the day. Unhurried, with one hand at her jaw, and she had to recalibrate her entire morning after the first time he did it, because it was not a beginning of the day kind of kiss. It was an entire argument in favor of abandoning the day's plans, and she had told him so, and he had been entirely unmoved by this critique and continued to kiss her exactly like that every morning, and she continued to let him. Because some battles are not worth fighting, and some are not actually battles at all. He texted her things that were not scheduling items. That was also new, and she found, somewhat to her own amusement, that she had strong feelings about his texting, specifically about the fact that he did it with complete sentences and punctuation, like a man filing documents, and she had told him so. And he had replied with a fully punctuated sentence telling her that he did not intend to change this, and she had laughed out loud alone in her office, and then looked around to make sure no one had heard her. In the professional world, they navigated the shift with the mutual competence of two people who were excellent at their work and trusted each other entirely. She anticipated him as she always had, and he relied on her read of situations as he always had, and the only visible difference was a quality in how they occupied the same room, a specific warmth in the professional container that had not been there before. His assistant Helena noticed. Helena said nothing, which was one of the reasons she had been with the company for 12 years. The evenings were different in the most significant way. The evenings, which had always had their own particular quality, two people in the same space choosing the same room, now had the additional quality of not needing to pretend that was accidental. She sat beside him on the long sofa and read her own book while he read his, and the city went dark below, and there was nothing performed about any of it. Just the weight of a life being shared by two people who had arrived at it by an unusual route and found, on arrival, that it fit. There were nights that were not about reading. Those nights had the quality of something she had not fully allowed herself to want for a long time. Not since before the 2 years of her mother's illness had compressed her world down to the functional and the necessary. Not since before she had built the professional distance that had kept her safe in his office for 4 years. They had the quality of warmth recovered, of being fully present with another person without managing the presence. The first of those nights had begun the way the kitchen at 3 a.m. had begun, with the accumulation of closeness past the point where the mind can maintain its arguments against the body. They had been on the long sofa, her book open in her lap, his closed on the cushion beside him, and he had reached over, very slowly, and turned one page of her book back, a page she had already read, and when she looked up at him, he was already looking at her. She had set the book down. What she discovered, in the dark, in the silence of the penthouse high above the city, was that Marcus Cole brought the same completeness to everything. The same undivided attention, the same deliberate patience, the same quality of presence that had made him formidable in boardrooms and that made him here in the dark, entirely undoing. He moved like a man who has decided something and is taking his time about it, not because he doubts the destination, but because he respects the journey, because he is attending to the whole of it with the same care he brought to anything he considered important. And she was important to him. That was the thing she felt most clearly, more than the warmth and the closeness and the specific discovery of what it was to be wanted by someone who knew exactly who he was wanting. She felt it in the way he looked at her, in the spaces between the other things, with something full and steady and without the professional filters, as if she was the thing in the room most worth looking at, and he was in no hurry to look away. She had understood in those nights, with a physical and particular comprehension that was not intellectual at all, why a person might agree to 47 clauses for the chance to be in proximity to this man. She had arrived at this understanding too late to make it useful as information, and too completely to do anything but be grateful for it. He was also, she discovered, very good at the moment just after. The staying. The particular warmth of a man who does not consider the intimacy to be concluded when the most visible part of it is, who keeps his arm around you in the dark and asks what you're thinking, and listens to the answer, and offers the real version of himself in return. She had told him things in those after hours that she had not told anyone. He had told her things in return that she understood were not offered lightly, About his father's early years in Harlem and what it had built in him. About the first company he had lost before Cole Meridian existed and what that failure had cost him. About the specific loneliness of being very good at something that does not naturally leave room for the rest of you. She had listened. He had listened. And between the listening and the warmth and the gold band on her hand and the particular sensation of waking up beside someone who had chosen you with full information and no contractual requirement, something assembled itself that she had no professional category for and no desire to file away. She was, she recognized, in the simplest and most complete possible way, in love with him. She had known it for a while. She was fairly confident he knew it too. They had not said it yet. There was a particular pleasure, she had discovered, in the not yet. In carrying something that full without putting words on it, knowing the words were waiting when the right moment arrived. She suspected he was waiting for the same moment she was. Elijah Cole Sr. came home from the hospital 2 weeks after the hospitalization. Not recovered. The word recovered was not in play. But stable enough to be home, the brownstone with its 4 decades of warmth and its particular smell of garlic and old books and a life deeply and well lived. And Elijah Sr. had informed the medical team with characteristic directness that if the time remaining to him was what it was, he intended to spend it in his own house, in his own chair, with his own people around him. Marcus visited every day. Vivian went with him 4 times a week, and alone twice. The latter not because Marcus asked her to, but because Dorothy called her, and Vivian understood, without it being explained, that Dorothy needed someone to sit with her sometimes who was not also grieving a father. She sat with Dorothy in the kitchen of the brownstone and drank tea and listened. And Dorothy talked about Elijah Young and Elijah Strong, and Elijah the first time she had seen him, 19 years old at a church social in 1973, wearing a suit that was too large for him and looking like he owned the room anyway. She talked about the early years and the hard ones, and the specific texture of a life built alongside someone. The way a person becomes so woven into the fabric of your days that their eventual absence is not something you can hold in your mind directly, only in glimpses, quick and unbearable. And then gone. One afternoon, Dorothy had stopped mid-sentence and looked at Vivian across the kitchen table with the seeing eyes that ran in the family and said, "Are you happy?" Vivian had not been expecting the question. She considered it honestly, the way she had learned to consider the things that mattered, without the professional filtration she had once applied to everything. "Yes," she said. Dorothy had nodded, slowly, and something in her face had settled, something that had been slightly held since February, since the first night at the brownstone when she had pulled Vivian into a hug and said finally. She refilled the teacups and they sat together in the afternoon quiet, and Dorothy said, "He was afraid, for a long time, that he built too well, that the thing he'd made of himself didn't have room for anything else." She paused. "You made room." Vivian had not known what to do with that. She had held her teacup and said nothing. And Dorothy had asked about her manuscript, and the conversation had moved on. And Vivian had carried that sentence home like something she intended to keep. She went home to the penthouse and found Marcus in the kitchen, or in the study, or standing at the tall windows looking at the city. And she went to wherever he was, and put her arms around him from behind, and held on. And he covered her hands with his, and held on in return. And neither of them spoke, because there was nothing to say that the holding didn't already contain. The contract had been nullified. She had watched Marcus sign the paperwork himself at the kitchen counter on a Tuesday morning, and she had watched him slide it into an envelope, and when it was gone, she had felt the absence of 47 clauses, like the removal of something she had forgotten she was still carrying. Her left hand still wore the gold band. He had not asked for it back. She had not offered it. They had both, in their separate ways, decided. One afternoon in early May, sitting in the front room of the brownstone while Dorothy was napping and Marcus was on the phone in the hallway, Elijah Sr. looked at Vivian with the still, seeing eyes and said, out of the quiet of the afternoon, "Tell me the truth." She looked at him. "You didn't love him when he married you," Elijah said. It was not a question. She considered her response. He was a man who deserved truth. "No," she said. "Not the way I do now." Elijah was quiet for a moment, looking at the afternoon light on the window. "But you do now," he said. "Yes," she said. He nodded slowly. Something moved in his face, not triumph, not satisfaction exactly, but a deeper thing, a father's thing. The specific piece of a man who has been worrying about something for a long time and can finally, in the limited time remaining to him, stop. "He's always been better than he lets people see," Elijah said. "He learned to be careful. The world teaches some people to be careful." He paused. "Don't let him be too careful." She looked at the old man in the chair, thinner now than he had been in February, smaller in some ways and larger in others, carrying something enormous in the stillness of him with a dignity that moved her every time she sat near it. "I won't," she said. He looked at her for a moment more, with the whole weight of his knowing, and then he nodded once, as if something had been confirmed to his satisfaction, and turned back to the window. When Marcus came back into the room and settled in the chair across from his father, Elijah looked at him and said nothing. He reached out, and Marcus leaned forward, and the old man put his hand on his son's face, briefly, with the particular tenderness of a parent who has run out of time for anything but the essential, and Marcus closed his eyes. And Vivienne looked away, out the window at the May afternoon, and let the moment be what it was without witnessing more of it than was hers to witness. In the car on the way home, she took Marcus's hand. He held on. "He told me not to let you be too careful," she said after a while. He was quiet for a moment. Then, very quietly, "He's been saying that my whole life." A pause. "He's right." She turned to look at him. "You're not careful with me," she said. "Not anymore." He turned to look at her, the dark eyes full and direct. "No," he said. "Not anymore." It was a Tuesday in June when Marcus Cole said the words. They had been at the brownstone all day. Elijah had had a good morning, lucid and warm, and they had all had lunch together. Dorothy's food, the specific miracle of it. And Elijah had told the story of meeting Dorothy 3 times in the way of old people, and everyone had let him tell it 3 times, and laughed in all the same places each time. And Vivienne had sat at that family table and felt the word family without flinching from it. That evening was a quiet one. Elijah resting, Dorothy in the kitchen, Marcus and Vivienne on the steps of the brownstone in the warm June evening, the street carrying its sounds, children and traffic and the general living music of Harlem in summer. And the step was narrow, so they were close together, his arm along the back of the step behind her, not quite around her, just near. They had been sitting like that for a while, not talking, when he said it. Not dramatically, not with preamble or careful setup, just into the warm evening air, with the directness of a man who has decided to stop being careful about the things that matter. "I love you." She turned to look at him. He was already looking at her with the same directness, the same complete and unguarded quality he had shown her in that kitchen at 3 in the morning when the contract was still technically intact and the 47 clauses were still technically operative, and he had stood in the dark with his hands on her waist and told her with his body what he was now telling her with words. "I have been," he said, "for some time. I did not handle it well initially, I'm handling it considerably better now." She looked at him for one long moment, this man in the evening light, the most complicated and the most honest person she had met, who had built a castle of professional distance around something simple and true, and had finally, with considerable difficulty and her assistance, found his way out of it. "I know," she said. He raised an eyebrow fractionally. "I've known for a while," she said. "I was waiting for you to say it." "You could have said it first," he said. "I could have," she agreed. "But you needed to. So I waited." He looked at her for a moment with something that was not quite exasperation and not quite admiration, and was, she had come to understand, the specific expression he wore when she had done something he found completely aggravating and completely right. "Vivienne," he said. "I love you," she said, simply and directly, the way true things should be said. "I have been managing that information with varying degrees of success since approximately 3 weeks after I moved into the penthouse, when you told me to finish my manuscript and looked at me like it mattered." He was quiet for a moment. "It does matter," he said. "I know," she said. "That's why." He pulled her close then, there on the brownstone steps in the June evening, with the street carrying its sounds around them and the warm air and the light fading. And she tucked herself against him, and his arm came around her properly, fully, the way it had been not quite doing. And they sat like that while the evening settled into night, and it was not performed for anyone, not his father watching from the window, or his mother through the curtain, or any of the assembled apparatus of the arrangement that had started all of this. It was just theirs. Elijah Cole Sr. died on a morning in late July, in his own bed, in his own house, with Dorothy holding one hand and Marcus holding the other. Vivienne was in the hallway. She had understood, in the way she had come to understand many things about this family, where she was needed and where she was not. And the room in that final hour was not a place for her. She stood in the hallway of the brownstone, and she held herself very still, and she listened to the sounds of the house. The particular and terrible quiet that descends when something irreversible is happening. And she waited. When Marcus came out, he looked at her, and she went to him, and he held her in a way that she understood was not about needing comfort, but about needing to hold something real, something present and alive and continuing, while everything else contracted to the enormous simplicity of loss. She held him back. She held him for a long time in the hallway of the brownstone, while Dorothy sat with her husband, and the July morning went on outside, bright and indifferent, and full of the world's continuing business. And she felt Marcus breathe. And she stayed. The weeks after were what those weeks always are, full of the logistics that grief generates to keep the hands busy while the heart does its slow, private work. The calls and the arrangements and the gathering of people who had loved Elijah Sr. and wanted to say so. Marcus handled the practical things with his usual precision, and Vivienne ran alongside him in all the ways she knew. And they came home to the penthouse each night with the particular exhaustion of loss and the particular comfort of not being alone in it. She finished her manuscript in September. She hadn't planned to, not that week, not even that month. But she sat down one morning while Marcus was in meetings, and she opened the file, and something in it had shifted. Some quality of what she wanted to say had clarified over the previous months, and she wrote for 6 hours without stopping. And when she came up for air, the file was complete, and the afternoon light was gold across the kitchen floor. She told Marcus that night. He set down his book. He looked at her with the full attention she had learned to expect and never stopped being moved by. "Read me the last page," he said. She read him the last page. Her voice was steady. His face was very still. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "Send it," he said. "I haven't even properly revised, Vivienne," he said. and he looked at her with the eyes that had been seeing her, specifically, since long before either of them had said anything about it. Send it. She sent it. On an afternoon in October, 8 months after a private ceremony in a library while February sleet tapped against the windows, Vivian Harlow sat at the kitchen counter of a penthouse 40 floors above Manhattan, reading a letter from a literary agent who wanted to discuss her manuscript. And Marcus Cole came home from a meeting and set his jacket on the back of a chair and crossed the kitchen and kissed the top of her head and said, "What's that?" She handed him the letter. He read it. She watched his face. The stillness. Then the thing that happened in him when he was containing something too large for his usual composure, which she now knew to look for, and which showed itself as a fractional softening around his eyes, and the specific quality of breath that meant something had landed somewhere real. He set the letter down. He looked at her. "I told you to finish it," he said. "You did," she said. "I was right." "You were," she said. "Don't make a habit of reminding me." He smiled. The real one. The one she had first seen in the library on their wedding day, and had spent the subsequent months occasionally startling herself by still encountering, still finding it the most disarming thing in a man who had spent 4 years being entirely armored. There was a world of people who would have paid to see Marcus Cole smile like that, with full and unguarded warmth, with none of the professional calibration. It was not for rooms or for any audience. It was only ever for her. He sat down beside her at the counter. Close. The way he always was now, not as performance, not as the careful choreography of a practiced arrangement, just the natural distance of two people who have decided to be near each other. And he picked up the letter again and read it once more. And she watched him read it with the specific tenderness of someone who knows that the real luxury is not the view or the address or the compensation terms of any contract, but this. A Tuesday afternoon, ordinary light. The person you love reading your words. She thought about February, the sleet on the library windows and the gold band being placed on her hand, and the minimal kiss that had not been minimal at all to her central nervous system. She thought about the kitchen at 3 in the morning and the 47 clauses dissolving in the dark. She thought about hospital corridors and brownstone steps, and the June evening he had said "I love you" like a man who had finally run out of reasons not to. She reached over and set her hand against his jaw, and he looked up from the letter, and she kissed him once, briefly, warm and direct, the way she kissed him on ordinary afternoons in October kitchens, when no one was watching, and there was nothing to perform, and the whole of it was simply theirs. He set the letter down. He looked at her with the full and undefended attention that was his version of everything, the thing he had been protecting behind controlled composure and 47 clauses, the thing that was only ever available in private, and had been available to her, specifically, for longer than either of them had said. "Marcus," she said. He looked up. "Thank you for asking me," she said. Not for the arrangement, for all of it. For the 47 clauses that had been the most roundabout way she had ever arrived at the most direct thing in her life. He set down the letter. He took her hand, the one with the gold band, and he held it. And she held back, with the ease of two people who have stopped negotiating and are simply living. "Thank you for saying yes," he said. Outside the tall windows, October had turned all of Manhattan the color of something burning beautifully. The city went on below them, all its noise and motion and magnificent indifference. And in the kitchen of a penthouse, two people sat together with the particular and irreplaceable warmth of people who have chosen each other, not by accident, not by arrangement, but by the slow and certain gravity of something real. The gold band caught the October light. The city hummed 40 floors below, indifferent. The contract had said no feelings. Every day of their life together said otherwise.